So I think, I will try and bring in a very different perspective today. And, so the perspective is like more as an architect, and what I feel, what are the challenges and how, this is something we can overcome. And so going back, I think, we were in college and you just mentioned about SPA Delhi. And I remember in 90s, we used to talk about a lot about precast buildings and all. And of course, Shabir has been doing a lot of work on that. Now, but again, we used to talk about it, but it never happened. I'm not sure why precast buildings never took off. We still, they did not evolve too much, from that era till today, correct. But again, now, good that there are a lot of discussions happening on this topic now. Now, so so since we are into like, multidisciplinary type of projects, we are doing, education projects, hospitality projects, commercial projects. So, but again, first I would like to highlight the challenges we face. So most of the projects today, if you look at it, one of the challenge we find is like, every project is going through a time overrun. Every project is getting late. Primary reason being, one of the reasons we have always see is like, labor is not available. Correct, in most of the sites. And so this is, so if in terms of every project getting delayed by, 1 to 2 years or more years, this is actually a tremendous loss for the, for us, but also for the country as a whole, because if we can be so non-productive and every project goes into a delay, then it's a big challenge, correct. So this is one of the challenges, I face it personally, my office faces it personally. Second thing is, I think, so when we look at, the buildings as a whole, I just feel that, what we design buildings, the buildings are really heavy. Now, of course, Manish ji, he's been involved with like as largely the industrial, part of the buildings where there, I think there's been a lot of optimization in terms of the materials that goes inside, building making the structures. So there's been a huge, improvement in terms of, reducing the resource which goes into a building, and which also makes it definitely more sustainable in the sense that we're using less resource to build them. So there are two challenges I think, which we face, on a daily basis. And, this is where I think that, where modular construction can help us, face this challenge. That is where I'm coming from. But again, I would like to just take it slightly away and, so I'm going to be talking about more about when we start looking at modular construction, how as an architect who designs buildings, so I want to look at it from my perspective, how will it change things? So we conventionally, we've been doing more like RCC, cast in situ buildings. We generally used to that, the way of working. Now, but when you go to modular, then, of course, the same philosophies, the same things would not going to apply. So I just made some list of challenges which I thought were, very important. So one, I'm going to call it the process challenge. The first challenge I think as an architect I can look at is the process challenge. The process challenge, what I mean is that, so we did, when we do like a general conventional RCC building, there is a way there's a lot of collaboration which happens with the clients. There's a lot of discussions will happen around, there are engineers involved, in designing the structure, etc. So there's a lot of collaboration process, and that's how projects start coming up. The design starts evolving. And there's a lot of, and as the project moves on, there are still discussions which happen at, once the construction starts. There are changes which happen. The things it's more organic and much more fluid. At this point of time. So changes keep on happening. But when we start looking at a very modular or a pre-engineered building, now these changes cannot happen. We cannot evolve the design as the building is constructed. Largely what you have to do is design everything, engineer everything, and then start building. You cannot start building without engineering. Correct. And the engineering cannot happen once the design is closed. So there's a process challenge. So one challenge is like, how do we, we have to change the way we work. So once we move from a conventional building to a modular building. Okay. Now, second challenge, which I will, which is another challenge as an architect, is what I'll call is the aesthetic challenge. The aesthetic challenge, what I mean is that, as in, let's say, so when we start looking at a building, I need, so if it's a building which is engineered, as in a pre-engineered, versus a building which is more conventional, the architecture style, the materials that goes into it, it needs an absolutely different thought process, correct. For example, we cannot, so suppose we need to make a pre-engineered building, but something, let's say we want to make it very brutal, like let's say one of those Corbusian buildings, a lot of RCC, full facade. which more cast in situ. No, that is not possible using a pre-engineered building. Correct. Even if it's possible, the objective is lost. Correct. So the point as an architect is that you need like a different set of thought process. In the sense that if it is going to be a pre-engineered building, then of course, like there's no point. The whole idea, if the whole idea of pre-engineered building is to start making it, build faster, then there's no point making a pre-engineered floors and then start putting brick walls. I would rather start going into dry walls. I would start looking at alternate facade systems. I would start looking at curtain walls, make the building lighter but also quicker. The whole, if that is the whole idea. Correct. So this challenge is, so what I'm trying to come across is, so if you're going to design through a modular construction or through a conventional, system, then from day one, I need to start the aesthetics of the building will completely, more or less, they're going to change, correct. And taking into account that, we are moving more into steel construction, pre-engineered steel rather than a pre-engineered RCC, correct. So which also means there's a lot of change in the materials which are going to be used, correct. Now, also, like, another challenge again, and I'm going to put forward is as architect is like, which also I think I was told to, talk about this, is like, are there limitations in terms of, pre-engineered building? So frankly, I don't think there are, limitation as in terms of design, like for as architects, we love to do, we don't want to do boxes, we want to create buildings are more fluid. We want to create, different forms, the different shapes of building, correct. Now, uh, but but once you start moving into again a very pre-engineered sort of a building now, correct. So there are absolute challenges now. As in, I cannot, of course, I need to change my thinking. But even if I look to, I'll give you an example in the sense that if you look at all the glass buildings which are in Gurgaon, which were done in, let's say, 80s, 90s, correct. So there were a lot of, you go to Gurgaon, you see a lot of shapes, you see different shapes of buildings, some are circular, curved, you can see the shapes, But now when you go to Gurgaon and, see most of the new buildings which are coming up, which are especially on the pre-engineered, they're like straight boxes, they're just making boxes, correct. So which of course means that, there are limitations, correct. And also, but it's also a challenge that how do you go out of that box and you still be creative and still create buildings which can be more architecturally pleasing, correct. So what I'm trying to say is that there are limitations. There will be limitations in terms of design, correct. There certainly will be, correct. And especially when there's a aesthetic, and architects love flexibility. They want to try out multiple things, in facades or in the design, whatever, correct. So largely, if I look at from my industry perspective, pre-engineered has been very successful. I think just like what Manishi said, in the industrial domain, it has been very successful. It's helped us make buildings very quickly. It has help bring down cost. But once we start moving into other domains like schools, hospitals, commercial, then there are the challenges start keep on growing, correct. So largely, I think one of the things I would, but looking into the in today's era where time has become a very important aspect, I generally know, because as I said about my personal experiences where every site is getting late, we generally know that we have to move into a pre-engineered buildings, correct. But how does architecture come, and how much of architecture and how much of engineering has to come together, because one of the biggest challenges when we think as an architect is that when we design conventional buildings, engineers, the role is less. But once we start moving into a modular construction, the role of engineers really increases, correct. And so that balance, how we can balance the different professionals into getting this will be a very, very important part of this whole future going ahead with the modular buildings, correct. And also I think so there's one more question which was put across to me, like how does the climate, what yeah, can can these pre-engineered buildings, can they adapt to the climate, correct. So I definitely feel that so once you start looking at pre-engineered buildings from using new materials, because there are a lot of materials in the market, like now we don't need to use a 230, 9-inch brick wall, for the facade. There are a lot of cladding systems, dry claddings, dry claddings, dry wall, their systems, and the good thing about these systems is, we can customize them, we can optimize them for the climate we are going to, design the buildings for, so it's much more scientific, in terms of how these buildings can adapt. Okay, so I think largely, I think, I don't want to take up too much time. I can keep talking, but this is what I will, I would like to end up here. But again, this was perspective more as an architect than, my experiences as an architect.